Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Releasing Trauma. I am your host, Tracy Osborne, and with me today is Christa Bevan, and we are going to be talking about a modality to help you heal from your trauma. So, Christa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited to have you and to learn a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today, this modality that we're going to be talking about, because I think it's going to be very beneficial to some of our listeners. So I can't wait to get into it. But before we get into that, I always like to start off the show with just having our guests tell us a little bit about your backstory and who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Christa Bevan, and my backstory as it relates to this conversation is that I had my first panic attack when I was 12 years old, and they would continue happening to me for almost 2 decades before I finally found TRE, which we're going to talk more about in just a minute. But I dealt with crippling anxiety and really overwhelming panic attacks for a really long time. And it was completely disruptive, to say the least. And I tried a lot of things, to help. And I got some relief, but I didn't get the relief that I was seeking until I found TRE. And then once I did, it completely changed my life, and it set me on a path of doing trauma healing work in my own life, eventually doing trauma healing work with others. It helped me to really discover some of the roots of the anxiety and the panic that I was having. And a lot of that was my own trauma history. And it sort of started the first domino of having a lot of things fall into place and start making sense in my life and make it so that I could completely stop the panic attacks, get a hold of my anxiety, and finally start living life the way that I imagined that it could be, that I was only dreaming of for a really long time.
I love it. I know so many of us suffer from anxiety and panic attacks, and they are no fun. And if you don't suffer, if you're lucky enough to not ever have dealt with it, it's hard to imagine how debilitating they can be. My daughter has anxiety, and it's really, until I ended up with anxiety of my own, it was really hard for me to understand what she was going through, and how it actually really kept her a prisoner of the house, actually.
Yeah.
So let's talk about TRE and how it helped you. So tell us a little bit about what it is.
Sure. So the first place to start is that TRE is actually an acronym, and it stands for Tension and Trauma Releasing Exercises. And these are physical exercises that are done. So you do different postures and you do different stretches in order to elicit a natural shaking mechanism that the body has. And this shaking, or in the TRE world, we call it tremoring, is part of your nervous system's ability to discharge stress. So it's something that your body already knows how to do. I actually sort of joke with clients that I'm not teaching them TRE, I'm helping them remember how to do this process. But essentially the idea is that traumatic or stressful situations that we encounter in our lives, unless they're really properly dealt with as they happen, and most of us do not do that. So most of us are dealing with some level of accumulated stress or trauma in our bodies. That's exactly what happens, is that it gets stored in our physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And so TRE is a way to help release some of that that's been held so that we feel better. And when we're holding on to stress in our body, it can look like panic attacks. It can look like anxiety. It can look like insomnia or trouble sleeping. It can look like chronic pain, right? So there's lots of different ways that it manifests.
Mm-hmm.
But bottom line is that we need to do something to sort of get it out of our system. And TRE is a really great way to be able to do that because it's tapping into this innate healing that your body already has. Your body wants to be able to discharge stressful events as they happen. And most of us interrupt that process and don't allow it to happen. And TRE is a way to reconnect to the ability to let that process happen on its own so that you can both self-direct it and then you can also let it happen organically when you're in a stressful situation.
Now, if I'm understanding this right, you do these exercises and they actually cause your body to shake.
Yes.
And it kind of is shaking loose all the trauma from your cells in a way.
Yes. And I know how ridiculous that sort of sounds when you hear it, right? But that is actually what's happening. And so it's not, I can sit here and shake my hand, but that's different than this shaking or this tremoring that's happening in TRE. So the TRE, this is actually something you've probably experienced before or seen in others and maybe not known what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, anyone who has dogs or has been around dogs when there's loud noises, so a thunderstorm or fireworks, right? And then the dog starts quivering and shaking.
Right.
That is a tremor, like what we elicit when we do TRE. So all mammals, their nervous system is designed to do this. We've maybe felt it in our own bodies if they're, if anyone's ever been in like a minor fender bender where there's like no damage, no one's been hurt, but you maybe like hit another car and you start shaking and you're like, nothing, we're all fine. Why am I responding like this? Or if you're afraid of public speaking and you have to speak in front of a group and your hands start shaking.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Or any kind of situation like that where you're in a stressful situation and then you feel shaky. That's this kind of tremor. What we do in TRE is it's self-directed. So we're allowing it to happen. We're consciously turning it on and in control to consciously turn it off. And so it's not overwhelming. It's not scary. You're not just, rolling or flopping around on the floor. It's much more controlled than that. But that movement through the nervous system helps to discharge and use up the extra stress hormones of a time where your nervous system has been activated. So when our nervous system gets activated and we go into fight or flight, right, that burns off those chemicals. So when you hear a noise in the night that wakes you up and you're not sure what it was, even after you realize that it was just the wind slamming the door shut that startled you, that pounding heart that you still have, the sweaty palms that you still have, right? Those are all being caused by the adrenaline and the cortisol and the norepinephrine that's running through your body in response to that sound that you heard.
Right.
Okay. Those need to be used up. Those need to be moved out of your system. And if you fight or you flight, that's using those up, right? Those take a lot of strength and endurance to be able to actually fight a predator or to flight and run away from one. The problem is most of us are not fighting or flighting from the stress in our life. And we're not doing anything else like shaking either to discharge that and to move it out of our system. Is this making sense?
It makes absolute sense because I know that society tends to live in a chronic stress environment. And so we're constantly producing cortisol, which, like you said, we're not using that because we're not in fight or flight mode. We're just in stress. And so it gets stored in our cells. It gets stored as fat. It gets turned into autoimmune disorders, if I'm understanding it correctly, and, all kinds of other things. So we have to get rid of this extra chemical in our system. so it doesn't make us sick.
Yeah, exactly. And TRE is one of the ways that you can do that, right? There's lots of different ways that you can help sort of nourish and regulate your nervous system and deal with stressful situations in your life, right? There's things like positive social interaction is one way that you can do it. You can spend time in nature and ground yourself. You can have physical movement or activity of any kind. It's why people, I am not one of these people, but some people I hear enjoy running. So there's a reason that they feel better afterwards. Maybe I'd feel better afterwards if I could try it, but I just can't be convinced to get off the couch. But right, so there's other ways that you can help release things from your system as well. It's just the TRE is this sort of built-in pressure release valve, if you will, that your body has. In fact, one of the biggest realizations that I had in my life when I first started my tremor practice is I realized that every single panic attack that I had ever had was tremors that I was suppressing. And when I realized that, it was like a light bulb went off, because it made so much sense, and it was so validating for me what I had experienced for so much of my life, which was that my body was dysregulated and it knew what to do. It knew that I needed to regulate and I needed to release some of, like you were saying, that extra cortisol that was in my system.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand that process and I was scared of it. And so I inhibited it. And that inhibition it bottled it up until it got to the point in my system where it blew up. And it blew up in the form of panic, and then a panic attack, right? Anyone that's had a panic attack, it's a very physical expression.
Mm-hmm.
And so it made so much sense, right? And that's just it, is that we tend to suppress this shaking response because in our culture, we see shaking as a sign of weakness and vulnerability. And we don't like weakness and vulnerability. And the reality is there's nothing weak and there's nothing vulnerable about doing this at all if we reframe it and we take that social conditioning out of it and we allow ourselves to really engage in this activity. It does make life easier, and it can just, again, release some of that steam and release the pressure valve so that you don't have all of that bottling up inside of you all of the time.
Now, you actually took it a step further, though, from these TRE exercises, and you actually combined it with yoga, correct?
I did. Yeah. So I had an established yoga practice in my life when I discovered TRE. I didn't discover it, but when I came across it in my life. And so it was a natural pairing for me because yoga is physical movements, right? And so when I was doing my TRE training, some of the TRE postures, I'm like, wait a minute, this is a yoga posture, or I could do this better with these yoga postures instead. And so I sort of hybridize them, and I teach both together. When I work with private clients, I use them in conjunction with one another, both for the yoga asana, the postures, but also the sort of yogic meditation and a lot of the breath work and a lot of the mindset work, because all of those things are supportive to regulating your nervous system. And so they're a really nice pairing with the release that you get from the TRE and then the capacity building and the regulating effects that you can get from yoga. So I put the two together.
Huh. That's interesting. I'm just trying to visualize because yoga is great for releasing tension and trauma. Yoga is fantastic for that. So to put the two together, I would think it just creates kind of a powerhouse of release.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to describe it, is as a powerhouse. It is a powerhouse couple for sure. I like to say that yoga and TRE together help free you from the past and anchor you in the present.
Oh, you're speaking my language. Considering I am all about letting go of the past and living in the present.
Yeah, and it's easy to say that. And people throw that advice out there. They're like, let it go, just be in the moment. And it's like, the thing about trauma, and Tracy, I know that you know this, but trauma is irrespective of time.
Oh yeah.
If you have unresolved trauma, it is the now, because your brain and the part of your brain that is traumatized doesn't know the difference of time. It is still experiencing it as though it is in the present moment. And so for people who don't understand that, to give the sort of advice like let it go and just be in the moment, it's like that's not actually how the brain works.
Right.
And so that sounds great, but you need tools that are supportive of that idea. And when you find tools that are supportive, like I did in my life with this combination, then you actually get to live that as a reality. Then you can let go of the past. You can resolve and heal that trauma. You can put it in the past, and then you can actually start to live in the present moment. And then you can actually find grounding and a place and a sense of centeredness that you can't get when you're living in your trauma still.
Right. Right. And, just for clarity, when I say let go of the past, I don't mean let go of the past. I mean, let go of holding on to it, because we tend to hang on to it. We tend to live in it so much.
Yes.
And, we have to release it. You can't just let it go. That will never happen. Like you were saying, but you can release the physical and emotional after effects of your past, and release living in your past so that you're living in the present moment. And it sounds like this is a great way to begin helping you to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. And what it does, I sort of say, I use the metaphor of a cup. Right. So like imagine a coffee cup and you pour water into it. At a certain point, the cup's going to overflow. Right.
Right.
So TRE, and for me, TRE in yoga does two things. One, it helps to upgrade you and give you a bigger cup so that you can hold more before it overflows. But the other thing that it does is it helps to dump the cup out. And so over time, it's doing both of those. Initially, it dumps the cup out so that you can go back to your life with a little bit more space between you and the stress response. And then as you continue to practice, it makes the cup bigger so that you can, it increases your capacity for dealing with stress in the first place. And so it's this beautiful, combination of relief in the moment and then also growth over time. That's where I have seen so much magic in my own life occur because of, right? So it's pretty exciting.
It does sound exciting, and I'm definitely want to dig into this a little bit more for myself. So I will be checking that out. How can we check you out? Where can we find you so that we can go get more information?
So you can head to my website, which is christabevan.com. And I've got links on there if anyone is listening and it sounds like TRE could be of benefit to them and they want to either ask some questions or find out more, then you can schedule a free chat with me on there. There's a link to schedule that, and then we can set something up and talk about working together.
And this is something that they can just do in their own home?
They can. And now a silver lining of the pandemic is that I am working with clients over Zoom, which actually works really well. And it allows me to work with people from the comfort of their home, and they can be all over the world.
Awesome. And do they need any special equipment?
Nope. They just need to have, a quiet room by themselves, and a yoga mat helps, but isn't even necessary. Everything we're doing for yoga is really gentle. We're not standing on your head. We're not twisting into a pretzel. So it's all beginner friendly if you're listening and concerned about that. But no special equipment, just space on the floor to move around.
Awesome. Christa, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about TRE and, teaching us a little bit more about a new modality to help us heal our traumas.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
This is wonderful. And listeners, you can find all of Chris's links down on the show notes, as always, if you're listening on the website, releasingtraumapodcast.com. If you are on one of our sister sites, just head over to the website and pull up Christa's show, and all her information will be there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on the next show.